What happened after Nina endured the worst? I lived next door to a lonely woman who had passed away. She had no family left. After her death, I would occasionally visit her house, tending to the garden, watering the flowers. One day I fell ill and stayed inside for 2 days. When I finally stepped outside, I noticed something unusual. The house next door, which had stood empty for so long, had come to life. A clothesline stretched between the posts, and on it hung freshly washed laundry, so white it looked like the first snow. I smiled. Finally, someone had moved in. I sat on my porch waiting to see who they were. First, a boy ran out of the house, followed by a little girl. They were neatly dressed, the boy's hair freshly trimmed, the girl's in two lovely braids. A moment later, a young woman appeared, small and delicate, a scarf tied over her head. At first, I thought she was their older sister, but it turned out she was their mother, Nina. That's how we met. Nina told me that she and her husband had lived in his family home before, but her mother-in-law had never accepted her. The tension led to constant arguments, so they finally decided to start fresh, moving far away from his relatives. That same evening, I met her husband. He worked as a mechanic on a farm, tall and broad-shouldered, with a firm but kind gaze. He seemed like a strong, reliable man. A month later, the house they had moved into was unrecognizable. It had become cozy, pristine white, with a well-tended yard and brightly painted shutters. The windows sparkled with cleanliness, like mirrors, and the garden was more carefully tended than ever before. Inside, everything was in perfect order. Everything gleamed. The children were well-behaved and close. During the day, I looked after them while Nina brought lunch to her husband. Though the farm provided free meals for the mechanics, Dmitro would only eat what his wife cooked. So Nina would run 3 miles to his work, through heat and rain, small, quick, with her white scarf tied around her head. Unlike Nina, her husband hardly interacted with any of the neighbors. He walked down the street silently with a proud air, simply nodding his head instead of offering a greeting. Half a year passed. One day, Dmitro's mother came to visit. We noticed that she didn't even bring any treats for her grandchildren. She simply walked into the house with empty hands. After that, I started to notice that Nina had begun to grow ill. Sometimes her voice was bright with joy, but other times she would look at the children with such sorrow that tears would well up in her eyes. And then she would disappear for weeks, never going outside, never inviting anyone over. One day I decided to pay her a visit. The children ran out onto the porch and stood before me like little guards. "Mom's sick," the boy said. "She's sleeping." But I didn't listen and went inside. Nina was sitting at the table, making dumplings. She looked exhausted, and on her arms and neck there were bruises. "I fell off a ladder," she whispered, avoiding my gaze. "My late husband. He never laid a hand on me." But I knew the truth. These weren't marks from a fall. These were marks from Dmitro's hands. "Why does he hit you?" I couldn't hold it in. "You're such a kind, gentle, caring wife." "His mother never accepted me," Nina sighed quietly. "She wanted him to marry someone from a respectable family. And me? I grew up without a father. My mother barely made ends meet." She turned away, looking out the window. "You know, at first everything was fine. But when she started coming to visit us, he changed. After the first time he hit me, my mother ended up in the hospital with a heart attack. She never came out." Nina's eyes filled with tears. "I was left all alone, an orphan. So I endure." After that conversation, Nina and I became closer. She helped me in the garden, and I helped with the housework when she was sick or feeling unwell. I noticed that Dmitro no longer came home, and Nina stopped bringing him lunch at the farm. At first, I didn't want to get involved in her affairs, but eventually I couldn't hold back. It turned out that he had started an affair with a local bartender, Allison. Before leaving, he had beaten his wife brutally, packed his things, and moved in with his new lover. Nina found a job as a cleaner in the grocery store. She walked around like a shadow of herself, barely eating, not sleeping at night. "I still love him. I can't live without him," she whispered. Meanwhile, Dmitro and Allison celebrated his birthday in such a way that drunk, he tried to hit her. But Allison wasn't as defenseless as Nina. She grabbed a mop and beat him so hard that the mop snapped in half. By morning, he was lying in the yard, and the next day a friend brought him home in an old pickup truck. Dmitro didn't leave the house for 2 weeks. Then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to work. And Nina began bringing him lunch again. But soon something happened that shocked the whole town. Dmitro beat his wife so badly that she ended up in the hospital. The neighbors visited her, brought food, and tried to support her. But she remained silent and didn't want to talk to anyone. But perhaps justice does exist. Dmitro paid a heavy price. While repairing a tractor, he hit his head so hard that they had to rush him to a clinic in the capital for surgery. Nina went into debt, trying to save her husband, but it was all in vain. His mother came to the funeral. She stood by the grave for a few minutes, and no one ever saw her again. And Nina. Every morning she would visit the cemetery and leave breakfast on her husband's grave. A year passed. They say time heals. Nina seemed brighter. She started talking to the neighbors. But she didn't speak to me for a long time. One day I couldn't hold back and asked, "Did Dmitro apologize before he died?" Nina smiled bitterly. "Oh no. Before he died, he told me never to marry again. He said that even from the other world, he would find me if I did." Much time passed. Nina married off her daughter and saw her son wed. Men tried more than once to win her heart. One even promised to carry her in his arms. But Nina never remarried.